Why does Waco matter? It was some deaths 20 years ago. Why is it so important?
Well, I mean, first of all, because human life is precious, and those cops had no right whatsoever to kill those people the way that they did. And the Army Delta Force helped them do it on the fire on the last day. But so, the real meaning of it in terms of, why it should matter to America for the long term is, ultimately that was a test to see what we would put up with. That's how it played out anyway. That wasn't the purpose of it. I'm not saying that, but ultimately, the American people supported the massacre, supported the tank raid. And we're told that these people were, had committed suicide. Really, if you look at what they did at Waco, it was the exact carbon copy that they used against Saddam Hussein 10 years later. In 2003, they said, look, this guy is crazy, so we can't negotiate with him. There's no point in negotiating with him because he's so damn insane. Secondly, he's got illegal weapons that the government says he's not allowed to have, and he could be plotting to use them against us. And then also, he's really bad to his own people. And so we have to liberate them and save them from this guy. It's the exact same thing that they did to the Davidians, that they ended up doing to the Iraqis. That was but turn it around the other way. Like, what do? They turned this group of Texan American Christians from the heartland of Texas, from Central Texas, and they turned them into a foreign enemy state. They turned David Koresh into Hitler and said that we have to stop him before he conquers all of Europe, before he marches on downtown Waco and takes it over, or whatever it was that supposedly he was going to do. And they turned this group of anyone who's not a liar, who knows anything about it, will tell you they were decent people. They were not criminals. That's if you watch the documentary Waco: A New Revelation, where they interview Sheriff Jack Harwell. He says they were salt of the earth people out there, man. They were good people. They were not criminals. They did not have a drug lab. They did not abuse their children. They were a pretty kind of wacky break-off group of the Seventh-day Adventists, but they're not, too much further on the fringe than a lot of Protestant groups in this country. And that's not to say that David Koresh was a good person, but it is to say that he was not Charles Manson. He was not Bo and T or, Jim Jones running this insane cult for his own power. It's just not true. But it didn't matter. The government was able to portray it that way. The government was able to lie to the American people and make the American people believe that Koresh had somehow lured these cops out to his house just to ambush them and kill them all. Which, how come only 4 died then? Seems like they'd all been lying in a pile of blood in the front yard. But anyway, in fact, none of that was true. And when they had a chance for peace, they started the war. When David Koresh said, okay, God told me to write my interpretation of the 7 seals and started writing, they knew that the game was up. He was on his last seal. He was writing the 7th seal, and then he was going to come out. And so they launched the attack then, in order, mostly, I think, to make sure to destroy the crime scene. The crime being the ATF raid in the first place, where the house itself was Defense Exhibit A, full of incoming bullet holes through the walls, through the metal door in the front, through the roof, where they'd been firing their M16s from a National Guard helicopter that Ann Richards, the Texas governor, had given them to use in the name of the lie that there was a drug lab there, a meth lab, which was never true in the first place. And so it just goes to show that, yes, they can take a group of American citizens and turn them into a foreign country and wage a war against them, and including finishing them off with the Delta Force, finishing them off by putting a bomb on the concrete room where the women and children were hiding. It was a pantry. It was a storm shelter. They called it the bunker, and militarized it. It was women and children hiding under towels from the banned poison gas, CS gas, that's illegal for use under the Geneva Conventions, that they used on these people. And then they bombed that room and crushed and burned the ones that hadn't already suffocated from the poison gas. It was an absolute catastrophe. The absolute debacle and massacre of these innocent people. And they got away with it scot-free, called it a suicide. Knock a building over with tanks until it catches on fire, and then set off a bomb on top of the concrete room where the women and children are hiding, and still call it a suicide. And they could get the American people to swallow it whole, too. That, to me, as a kid, you know, I saw this play out in front of my eyes, and I never believed it was a suicide. I always believed that the cops had murdered those people. Why don't you show me the back of the house then? Yeah, because that's where they're murdering the people. And we know now from the forward-looking infrared footage from the FBI's own plane, from the FLIR, you can see the hostage rescue team and the Delta Force get out of those Bradley fighting vehicles and fire their machine guns toward the building as it's burning down and killing off the people who are trying to escape the fire in the back of the house. But the American people, they loved it, man. They thought it was great. The USA Today opinion poll had 93% supported the raid. Even after the next day, after you knew, not do you support raiding the place, but do you support the raid that just ended in catastrophe? And the answer was yes. And I'll tell you why too. It was because it was interrupting daytime TV, right? This didn't all happen on one day. It was a 51-day siege. From February 28th through April the 19th. So just think how long ago, especially this year, think how long ago February 28th was, right? We've had a very long March and April this year. That's how long the Branch Davidian show was interrupting The Price is Right and One Life to Live. And the housewives of America wanted them all killed. And I know that because I was 15 sacking groceries at the time at the local grocery store in Northwest, suburban, white, upper middle class Austin, Texas. And every single one of those housewives wanted to go in there and murder those people themselves. Well, I say they just go in there and end it. End it now. He said he was Jesus. Nail him to a tree. Kill them all. And I bet if you line them up, I bet you couldn't find one housewife in Northwest Austin who was opposed to go in there and end it now. Other than, I hope, my mom. I don't remember really discussing it with her at the time. But I'm pretty sure she would have been good on it. But the rest of them, no. The rest of them wanted blood because The Price is Right is more important. Their daily soap operas are more important. And how dare this mullet-headed, Trans Am driving redneck idiot interrupt their daily TV schedule. And go in there and end it means kill them, not him. Oh, he said he was Jesus. So kill every child, all 17 of them. Kill every man and woman who are the helpless, useless dupes of this charismatic cult leader. Well, if he's a charismatic cult leader, that makes them virtually innocent victims of his, right? Kill them too. That was the consensus of the housewives of Austin, Texas. These people have no better right to live than Iraqis. And so they were killed. That's exactly it.
And even the original justification of what they were going in for, they could have, I had David Thibodeau on my show, and he goes, well, they could have arrested Koresh when the ATF informants were shooting with him the days before the initial raid on February 28th. Mm-hmm. So it looks like a definite setup, much like Randy Weaver. The FBI informant sold him the sawed-off shotgun by 1/4 inch right. As a justification to further invade. So, yeah, that's a total setup founded on lies.
Although, well, I'll quibble with you on what happened with the Randy Weaver thing was the ATF. It was an ATF informant that set him up on the barrels because they were trying to then force him to become an informant. And he refused. So then they sent him the wrong court date. And that may have been an accident. I don't know if that's true or not. But then when he didn't show up for court, they gave him a warrant for failure to appear. At that point, it was federal marshals went to his property. And what happened was the son, Sammy, and the family friend, Kevin Smith, were walking with the dog. And the dog caught the scent of the marshals hiding and took off after them. And they shot the dog. And then, so at that point, the son, who was only 12 years old, or I think he was 14, he looked like he was 12 or something, went, oh, you son of a bitch, and started shooting at them wildly. I don't think he even saw them. But then they started firing back, and he turned to run, and they shot him in the back and killed him. And the family friend, Kevin Smith, I'm almost certain that was his name. It's been a long time, but the family friend was wounded and made it back into the house. And at that point, the FBI came and laid siege to the whole place. And then next day or 2 days later, the FBI sniper Lon Horiuchi blew Randy Weaver's wife, Vicky's head off as she was holding her infant daughter in her arms at the time. And then the siege lasted another few days, and Boegreitz, the special ops guy, negotiated an end, and Weaver eventually surrendered and was acquitted. And the jury that acquitted him said that they wished that they had had the power to convict the ATF and the marshals and the FBI for what they had done to him and his family. And he ended up winning millions of dollars in a civil suit against them and all of that.
I thought Weaver's initial issue with the ATF was he was selling guns without a license. Is that not true?
I'm not even sure if that's true at all. I know that they tricked him into selling a sawed-off shotgun that was 3/8 of an inch too short or whatever it was.
That was my
and
own.
They entrapped him with an informant because they were trying to force him to become an informant because he had been seen at like a white supremacist rally, and they wanted him to inform on the other people who were there, and he refused. And that was where all the revenge came from there. But anyway, the same thing here with the Davidians. You're absolutely right that, as the saying goes now, they could have arrested David Koresh anytime. He went jogging out on the roads out there in the countryside, on a regular basis. He went to Walmart once a week, whatever. They could have arrested him whenever they want. And for people who don't know the story, I strongly urge you to watch Waco, The Rules of Engagement, and Waco, A New Revelation. And they show in there, in the first episode, they show the gun dealer, Henry McMahon was his name, and he was Koresh's gun dealer. And one day Koresh called him while the ATF was there asking about him. And McMahon says, "Oh, hey, I got Koresh on the phone right here. He wants to talk to you." Koresh wanted to invite them out to come and look at all of his weapons. And the ATF agent went, no, and refused to take the call because they wanted the raid. It was called Operation Showtime. And the undercover ATF informant there was a guy named Robert Rodriguez. And he'd been out there shooting with Koresh over and over again. And that day, he was there that morning. And Koresh said, "Listen, I know you're a cop, and I know you're here, for the raid that's coming and everything. But let me tell you about the gospel of Jesus Christ." And tries to save his soul and convert him that morning. And then this guy, was it Rodriguez? I'm almost sure his name was Robert Rodriguez. And he runs out. He tries to warn. He calls ATF and says, "They know we're coming. The element of surprise is lost. Don't come." And in fact, I think he even claimed that he was out in the road, like waving them down, trying to stop them on the road on the way in. And they just blew right past him and raided anyway, knowing that the element of surprise had been completely lost. And Koresh knew, saw right through the facade and knew this guy was a cop and tried to stop the raid. And the local news crews were already there in the front yard, set up, ready for the whole thing before the cops ever got there, because they had sent out press releases to all the news crews that we're going to have a big thing. And the whole deal, the reason they called it Operation Showtime was because, remember, this is just the very beginning of the Bill Clinton years. Bill Clinton's been in office a month and a week. And the ATF had been in a lot of trouble because they'd been selling N-word hunting licenses, as a joke, supposedly. And they had been sued by women and black employees of the ATF for sexual harassment and racial harassment and discrimination. And so then in comes Bill Clinton and Al Gore. And one, you had the whole Bill and Hillary and Captain Planet and the UN and Earth Day and all this kind of whole liberal PC culture that came with them. And you had Al Gore, who had his program of reinventing government, is what they called it. And what that meant was they were going to do a bunch of consolidations. And one of the proposals was to fold the ATF into the Justice Department and put them under the FBI at the Justice Department. Whereas at this point, they were part of the Treasury Department. And so they wanted to resist that. They're already little brother to the FBI. Now they would be nothing compared to the FBI if they were changed from Treasury to DOJ. And so they launched Operation Showtime as a public relations stunt to prove to the Democrats that we might be a bunch of mullet-headed rednecks, but we target mullet-headed rednecks too. And here, this, Trans Am drive-in Koresh, he's going down at our hands, and that's going to prove how useful we are to the liberals. And that was why they did it. That was the reason for the raid, was as a PR stunt after the disaster of Ruby Ridge and the sexual and racial harassment lawsuits to try to save their bacon. And it worked. Of course, Congress, even with the total debacle, Congress lined up and gave them all the money that they wanted.
Yeah, that is what happens. I mean, I think George Bush was at like a 90% approval rating after the 9/11 attacks. It's like when government screws up, then they have every incentive to do so.
Yeah, back to your great quote from the book there of George Bush saying, and I'm so proud that from the time of September 11th to the end of my presidency, there were no more terrorist attacks. Yeah, what about September 11th itself? And this was, what was funny too, the Republicans spent so much time saying that George Bush kept us safe. George Bush kept us safe. And no one would ever contradict them about it. That except that one big one, right? And so then when Jeb started running for president, he got stuck on the talking point, but he couldn't think it through in any realistic way. So he says, my brother kept us safe. Remember the rubble? Remember the rubble of September 11th? And he kept us safe after that. Well, Donald Trump is not a CNN anchor. So Donald Trump calls him on. He goes, yeah, I do remember the rubble. What do you mean? Yeah, that attack happened on your brother's watch. You want to brag about that? And Jeb was taken totally by surprise because no one had ever made that point before where he could hear it. And he literally said, remember the rubble? As though you're just that was supposed to be the Bill Clinton years or something. Not George Bush's watch. Hey, he was only president for 8 months before that attack. I mean, have you ever had a job where your boss expected you to start doing your job within the first 8 months since he started paying you?
Yeah.
But anyway. Wait, before we go.
Yeah.
It's also the anniversary of the Oklahoma City bombing.
So
I'll tell you just real fast about that.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question.
Oh, okay. So we'll go ahead and ask it.
Okay, I was going to say, what is the most important aspects of the Oklahoma City bombing that you would like people to know about?
Okay, and that is that there's a huge cover-up. McVeigh did it. He was guilty as hell, but he had a lot of help. And he was not a militia guy. He was a Nazi, a real one. And all of his Nazi buddies, they were allowed to get away with it. The cops let them get away with it. And the reason why is because they were all undercover informants and flip states witnesses and guys that the FBI should have had tabs on and should have prevented. They had all the prior knowledge in the world that they needed to prevent that attack, and then they didn't. The ATF was going to raid the Nazi compound before it happened. The FBI prevented them from doing so, said, we'll handle it, and then they didn't handle it. And so there was a massive cover-up. But here's the good news. A guy named Richard Booth has collected thousands of documents from the FBI, the ATF, the Secret Service, the local cops, the trial transcripts, everything in the world. And should be, by the time this episode airs, every bit of that will be available for your audience at libertarianinstitute.org/OKC. And we will have the world's greatest collection of documents of the truth behind the Oklahoma City bombing that anybody's ever seen. He's come from the Jesse Trentadue hearings out in Utah, and on and on. And so, in fact, we're even talking about when we're done with this, we should probably hand the entire haul over to WikiLeaks too, because they do not just things that are leaked directly to them, but they also store, for example, they have a whole section of Hillary Clinton's emails that were released by the State Department, that were not leaked to them, but were released by the State Department, but they keep them and catalog them all anyway. So when we're really done with this, I'm going to talk with Richard Booth and see what he thinks about getting all these mirrored on WikiLeaks as well. But this is the mother lode, and this proves that it was McVeigh was in conspiracy with the Aryan Republican Army bank robbery ring, and that these were the guys who did the attack, and that one of these informants, Andre Strassmeyer, seems like he was actually an agent provocateur. He was not really a Nazi at all, but was pretending to be a Nazi, had infiltrated their group, had encouraged the attack and participated in it, and then was allowed to get away. The others, I don't think any of the others were necessarily provocateurs, but I think it's pretty clear that Strassmeyer was. In fact, he admitted it to virtually almost perfectly clearly admitted it to Ambrose Evans Pritchard of the Daily Telegraph, that he wasn't just an informant. He made the attack happen.
And also you have women like Carol Howe, who was an informant at Elohim City, who was saying, I heard them talk about the Murrah building specifically so many times that there's no way this is a coincidence.
She went along with them when they cased the building. And then later, she drove her ATF handler, Angela Finley Graham, on the exact route of them casing the different buildings in the city, and said, this is where we went, and drove right by it and pointed at it. And her handler, Angela Finley Graham, admitted that that was true under oath in a deposition, that she warned specifically that they were going to hit this building. And so that was the key to it. The ATF had an informant inside the FBI's terrorist ring. And the FBI shut down the ATF investigation, said, we'll take care of it. And then they didn't take care of it. And 168 people were killed.
Yeah, it was sort of like the modern day COINTELPRO, where they were infiltrating groups in the 60s. They had PATCON in the 90s, Patriot Conspiracy, where they were infiltrating, militia groups of the sort.
Yep. And you're going to have all of this, everything, every document. You could spend the rest of your life reading the documents that we have on the Oklahoma City bombing, all at libertarianinstitute.org/OKC. It's the mother lode.
Terrific.